So once you've figured out how to operationalize your dependent variable, and once you know what indicators you're looking for, in other words, what you're going to measure, then it's important to make sure you also know the direction in which you expect to see the change. So if you think back to when we talked about research questions, oftentimes those research questions are phrased in terms of A will lead to a decrease or an increase in B. It's really important because sometimes we think that just because something goes up, it's a good thing, and that when it goes down, it's a bad thing. But for example, if you're looking at decreasing the number of arguments between a couple in family therapy, then you might actually want to see that decrease, but just by visually looking at it, you may not understand whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. So it's important to understand what direction you want to see. Is this a negative change or is this a positive change? So here are just, again, a couple of examples of how you would phrase that in writing up your research in single subject design and how you would be able to understand that. So then who are you measuring? Or rephrase that, who is doing the measuring? Well, think back to when we talked about the different paradigms and how sometimes it's really hard to say that one person can really objectively capture the truth. So you as a practitioner, you might have observer bias. You may want to see change, and you may, for example, if you're looking at family therapy and looking at the number of arguments a couple has as your indicator that you're measuring, maybe you might brush off what looks to be just like a disagreement and not count it as an argument because you want to see that there's progress. You don't want to think of it as an argument because that indicates something that, again, you don't want to see in your intervention. So you might have some bias. Clients themselves, they might want to lie to you. Again, they want to be liked, generally just like most people do. So if you're asking somebody to tell you the number of drinks that they've had, there is a risk that they might decrease that number. If you're trying to study HIV prevention and you ask somebody the number of sexual partners they've had, you might see a decrease in number out of a desire to please. Significant others are going to be important too. Maybe you might ask teachers or parents or neighbors to help fill in some information. Now, again, you can't say that they're as committed to the study, so you may not get as consistent of data as you'd hope. But again, it might be a source of information. Now, if you can get all three, well, then you have what we call triangulation. And there you have even greater reliability, meaning that you're more likely to get the same results if you were to repeat this again. So how are you getting this information? Well, sometimes you don't have the time. You don't have the chance to go back and get a baseline. So sometimes you have to do it what we call retrospectively, which means you just start the intervention anyway, but you go backwards. So maybe you have the client fill out a report that says, before you came to the program, what was it like for you? So maybe they're having to recall information that, or baseline information from the past. Sometimes it's in a case record. Again, this makes it questionable. You don't know how reliable people's memory is. Sometimes people just have to self-report. And again, here you have that bias of them wanting to answer in a way that makes it desirable. They don't want to say they were having, 10 drinks a night if you were measuring, for example, alcohol use. So they might kind of simplify it, and people answer, again, the way they think you want to hear sometimes. Of course, you can do your own observations. We know it's time challenging. We know sometimes resources are a challenge. And sometimes you might be trying to observe things that just aren't going to happen in the time that you see the subject. Now, if you have the client observe themselves, so for example, if you're having somebody if you're tackling anxiety and you want somebody to monitor the number of times they wake up during the night, well, you might have some measurement bias because they know they're being evaluated. So you might have somebody be that much more aware aware of how many times they wake up and put a little bit of extra effort to modify their behavior simply because they know they're being observed. So that's the issue with clients reporting their own observations. It can be unobtrusive, which means maybe the participants don't notice that you're observing them, or they could be very, very clearly aware. So you just have to look at what is it you're trying to observe, what's the best way to observe it. Now, we also have to think about reliability and validity. So when you're doing so many measurements, people are answering questions over and over. You're observing them over and over. You're reviewing case information over and over, and you have to think about the impact of that. Are clients just going to start answering questions the same way because they know what to expect? That type of issue can come up in single subject design.